So this is new stuff for the NHL, a taxi squad. It's like the NFL and the CFL. They have practice squads where they stash players to keep in case there's injuries. And of course, in football, it's different than the NHL and basketball and baseball because football doesn't have a minor league system in place. The NHL does. But of course, with COVID, the pandemic, it's hard to shuttle players back and forth between teams, particularly if you're in Canada, and particularly if you're a Western Canadian team. But we can get all into that. But I think right off the hop, the three Western Canadian teams, actually the three Pacific Division teams that are in this year's North Canadian Division, Edmonton, Calgary, and Vancouver, they're at a bit of a disadvantage to everybody else, including their Canadian brethren in the East and Winnipeg. They don't have their farm teams in Canada. Winnipeg, Toronto, Ottawa, Montreal do. And obviously the ones in the United States do as well. But Canada, those three teams I mentioned, they're all down in the United States, and they can't just bring guys up and send guys down. Hence, they do have this taxi squad, but so does everybody else. That's a competitive disadvantage in my mind.
Yes, it is. I think the teams, Vancouver, Edmonton, Calgary, have to be a little more sure of who they want on their taxi squads, because you can't, if you make a mistake with, this guy's going to be in our taxi squad, and you got to send him down because you made a mistake and he's not ready to contribute as an NHLer, then you got to call somebody back up, went from the States, and he's got to quarantine. Whereas in, the Manitoba Moose play in Winnipeg and the Toronto Marlies play in Toronto. And I think the Laval Rocket are actually playing at the Bell Center. They're going to play their games at the Bell Center. And Ottawa's farm team, is in Ontario as well. So it's an advantage to them. The interesting thing with the taxi squads are we don't know from day to day now who's going. Normally you take a look at the 23-man roster, and teams carry a couple of extra guys, and if somebody's hurt or somebody plays poorly, somebody off that on your 23-man roster just comes in and plays. And you say, okay, fine. And if you get a run of injuries, then you go to your farm team and you got to call up some people. Now you've got a taxi squad. Sometimes you're not carrying 23 players. Now the Oilers are carrying 23 players. If you're going to carry 6 taxi squatters, there's no real reason that you have to carry 23 players. If you got a taxi squad, you can just, for cap reasons, it might save some money by not having 23 guys. But the Oilers are choosing to have 23, and it'll be interesting. If there's some, there's a couple of farmhand on the Oilers taxi squad, and Tyler Benson and Ryan McLeod, who played in Bakersfield last year. Both played in Switzerland on loan. And then there's other players like Patrick Russell, who was on the roster last year. He's on the taxi squad. Alan Quine, who was in Calgary's system, but as a veteran NHLer, is on the squad. And Joakim Nygard is on the squad. And he was on the roster last year. So, and they just signed, signed Devon Shore, and he cleared waivers. So now he's in the mix as well. And he's a veteran NHL player. So I guess that, the long answer to your short question is, I think from day to day, the Oilers and every other team will be hauling people off their taxi squad, putting them on the regular roster, and playing them. Especially if somebody is injured, it's an easy fix. And with back-to-back games, it just makes it so much easier than it would be before.
And obviously, having the taxi squads for all the NHL teams is, last minute, we have a positive COVID test. So that means this player is going to come in and this guy's going to come out. They don't have to worry about trying to call someone up in a hurry. What I think is, maybe if things start to pile up as far as COVID goes, or even just regular injuries, that's when the handcuff could come in for Edmonton, Calgary, Vancouver. You've got that 2-week quarantine period where they come up from the States, where the player's not available to them. And then if you did want to make some adjustments, say to your taxi squad or whatever, that to me is something that is significant.
Well, it is a disadvantage if you run into a whole pile of injuries. But every team, the Oilers are carrying 5 skaters on their taxi squad, and will be anyway, and one goalie. You would hope that you don't run into a situation where you get more than five injuries or five COVIDs, and all of a sudden you got to go down to your minors and call up more players. I think with the taxi squads, it's much more difficult for a fan to figure out who's in the roster and who's playing, and unbelievably difficult for every team's capologist, to use the taxi squad, put them on the regular 23-man roster, or 21 or 22, for cap reasons only, because this guy's making less money on the taxi squad than somebody else on the regular squad. We're putting him on. And it might only be for the day to save some money, a day between games, say, you put somebody on the taxi squad, and then bring them off the taxi squad to play the game. So,
what about the potential for a player to be perhaps sit for longer than they want? I mean, I don't think that's going to happen. You already mentioned that teams, it's probably in their best interest to get some of these taxi squatters some playing time here and there, just to keep their legs fresh and keep them game ready. But at the same time, you want your best players to play if they're healthy, obviously. I think about an Evan Bouchard who's on the taxi squad right now. How much is he really going to play? I mean, he's still developing as a player. It's his third year in the organization. But what's best for a player like a Bouchard or anybody else who might be a regular taxi squatter?
It's a good point. With the younger players, you preferably would like them to be in the minors, whether you're Bouchard or Tyler Benson or Ryan McLeod, playing games. Now, the American League doesn't start until February 5th, so you've got several weeks here before you have to make up your mind. But the taxi squad can practice every day with the team, but they can't play. If they're going to sit, you don't want a young player per se sitting. And in Bouchard's case, I think he's a little ahead of Tyler Benson and McLeod in terms of depth chart. He's probably the number 8 defenseman in their pecking order, so he's not that far away from playing a game. So he might actually play some games. Now, in Benson and McLeod's case, they have, as I pointed out, they have several more veteran NHL players, forwards, ahead of those two guys, who were, for lack of a better word, tweeners, good American leaguers, and can play in the NHL too, whether you're Alan Quine or Patrick Russell. And they might play before the two Benson and McLeod. So it's kind of silly to have them sitting here, is I guess what I'm saying, if they should be playing. But as you pointed out, if you send them down, then you got to, they get hot and they're playing great down there, and you want to bring them back, and then they got to quarantine before they can play. So these are all questions that a much smarter man than I, Ken Holland, has to look at every day, along with his coach Dave Tippett, and say, okay, is this to our benefit, having these guys just sit around, or do we want them playing?
Yeah, I know that obviously this topic came up during meetings before the season got going last year, even in December, about the potential to move their AHL franchises up to Canada for the season, obviously for this very reason. And Winnipeg and Toronto, Montreal and Ottawa having that luxury. It's pretty nice luxury, I would think.
It's too expensive for the teams.
Oh yeah.
To have,
I mean, flying the condors around, like
and then you got to put them up at a hotel, and then then there's got to be dates that make sure they can play the games, and and then you bring those farm teams up here, and then what are you doing then? Are you just playing against those 3 teams? Is it a whole division, just the 3 Canadian teams? Vancouver's farm team, Edmonton's farm team, and Vancouver's.
Yeah. Well, in the East, those 4 AHL teams are playing each other.
Yep, they're playing each other. So
yeah, it's almost like old school.
I think it seemed like a good idea at the time. It's like having a couple of drinks and thinking, oh, that's a good idea. I'm going to go buy that car I really wanted, and then you wake up the next morning and say, I don't have the money for that. So what was I thinking?
Yeah. Well, I also think about, just the little things that, help a team win. And if that's one factor that, you could argue made the difference in a game and someone misses the playoffs by 2 points, maybe that's something. Now, once in a blue moon, we see an NHL team, doesn't matter where they are, all of a sudden in need of a goaltender. Typically what we've seen, here in Edmonton, but anywhere, is they, quickly go and find, say, a university or an old pro or somebody to basically fill the backup role and sit on the bench and hope like heck he doesn't have to go in. I don't know if we would ever get to that point in the NHL. It's crystal ball time. We don't know how the COVID pandemic is going to affect gameplay and rosters and stuff like that. Would there be any, beer leaguer's dream come true and go suit up for the Oilers? Or would the league probably step in and go, you know what, we've got to take a pause and maybe not play for a few days to see if we can get the pandemic cleared up?
So you're talking like both goalies, both Koskinen and Smith get COVID.
Like the David Ayers example from a couple of years ago.
Forsberg or Stuart Skinner, whoever is the third goalie, he can play, but you still need another goalie. Well, the problem with that is college hockey is not being played either in the city. So, and the juniors aren't playing, so I don't know where you would get another goalie. And I didn't checked in with the Zamboni driver to see if he plays in a beer league anywhere like David Ayers in Toronto when he came in for the Carolina Hurricanes. So I don't know. I think that's why they told teams you got to carry a third goalie on every road trip now. The third goalie's going with you. It kind of cuts out the chances of a kid living his dream and getting to put a team jersey on, and then at the end of the game gets his $500 and several rolls of tape and a thank you and a team sweater. I think those days probably with the third goalie are by the boards.
Yeah, it's a dream.
Whether
you're a goalie or a player, who knows, right?
They are making sure now that from what I understand, if Dustin Schwartz, the Oilers goalie coach, wants to talk to his goalies, he talks to one goalie at a time, and then he talks to the other goalie. So he's not talking to them both at the same time. So they're not in close proximity to one another. There's no problem with them in terms of the dressing room. One goalie's on one side, one goalie's on the other side. They're a lot further away than 6 feet. They're 36 feet away from one another, so they're not dressing beside one another. So the chances of them getting COVID that way. But if you're in Edmonton, having both goalies get sick is a major problem. I would suspect if Leon Draisaitl got COVID and Connor McDavid was in close contact and he had to also sit out, that would probably hurt them more.